The day everything changed, Clara Reyes was on her knees scrubbing a bathroom floor that did not belong to her. She had scrubbed floors before. She had scrubbed them in motels where the hot water ran out after 30 seconds, in diners where the manager docked her pay if she left a water spot on the tiles, in the small apartment she had shared with her mother in the last 2 years before her mother died and left her with nothing but a worn Bible and a grocery bag full of photographs. Clara Reyes had spent the better part of her 28 years on her knees in one way or another, and she had always gotten back up. But the bathroom she was scrubbing today was different. The tiles were imported Italian marble. The fixtures were gold. The shower alone was the size of the living room she'd grown up in. And the woman who had handed her the mop, smiling warmly, wearing a simple blue house uniform exactly like the one Clara now wore, was not a housekeeper at all. Clara didn't know that yet. What she knew was that she needed this job. Her nursing license had been suspended pending a fraud investigation she hadn't committed, and the investigation was taking longer than anyone had promised, and her rent was 3 weeks late, and the woman at the agency called at 7 in the morning to say there was a live-in position available starting immediately, and the pay was more than Clara made in a month of nursing shifts. She had said yes before the woman finished the sentence. She had not known, signing the agency paperwork, whose house this was. She found out 20 minutes into her first day when she rounded a corner with a bucket of cleaning supplies and walked directly into the chest of a man who made the hallway feel suddenly impossibly small.
He caught the bucket before it hit the floor. He straightened with the smooth efficiency of someone whose body had been trained for exactly this kind of fast, controlled response. He looked at her. Clara had cared for men in hospitals whose faces had been through violence. She knew the particular quality of a face that had been tested. This man's face had that quality. Sharp jaw, sharp dark eyes, a neck tattoo that peaked above a collar that probably cost more than her first car. He was tall and broad-shouldered, and he looked at her the way people who were accustomed to reading rooms looked at a new variable. Careful, thorough, giving nothing back. "You're new," he said. "I started this morning." He reached for the bucket. He didn't let go immediately, and for one odd, suspended moment, they were both holding it, looking at each other, before he released it and stepped back. "Santiago Reyes," he said. The name hit her like cold water. She knew that name. Everyone in Miami knew that name. The Reyes Group. Import, logistics, real estate, and the other things, the things the news articles danced around but never quite said directly, the things the agency had definitely not mentioned. "Clara," she said, because her voice had decided to work independently of her brain. "Welcome to my house, Clara," he said, and walked away without looking back. She stood in the hallway holding a mop bucket with both hands and told herself very firmly that she was going to be professional and invisible and gone the moment her nursing license was reinstated. She had absolutely no idea that the woman who had handed her the mop was watching the whole thing from the top of the staircase, holding a cup of coffee in both hands, a small, sharp smile on her face. Valentina Reyes had been planning this for 6 months.
She had learned, in 50 years of living, 30 of them spent building an empire with a man who burned like a controlled fire, that the best way to know the truth about a person was to show them someone with nothing. People with nothing were invisible in certain rooms, and invisible was exactly what Valentina needed to be. Her son was 32 years old, cold as marble in most situations, brilliant and ruthless in the way of people who had watched their father build something from nothing and decided to spend their whole lives proving they deserved to inherit it. He had not brought a woman home to the Reyes mansion since the incident 4 years ago. A woman's name Valentina did not say out loud anymore, because even the syllables left a bad taste. And the fact that he had brought Isabella Montoya home 6 months ago, formally, with the particular careful attention of a man who had decided to try again, meant that Valentina needed to know exactly what kind of person Isabella Montoya was when no one was performing for her. She had applied to the agency herself. She had a history in hospitality going back decades that conveniently left out several important details. She had told the agency she needed the money and was happy to work weekends. What she had not planned was the new girl. The agency had sent someone else the same morning, a scheduling mistake, the coordinator said apologetically. And Valentina, in a small but pivotal error in her otherwise meticulous planning, had simply handed the new girl a uniform and shown her the supply closet before anyone thought to check paperwork.
She had watched Santiago walk into that hallway. She had watched the new girl, Clara, she'd said her name was, in a voice that did not shake even slightly, even with a mop bucket in her hands, facing a man who made entire boardrooms nervous, and felt something shift in her chest that she didn't have a name for immediately. She filed it away. She had other things to focus on. Specifically, she had Isabella Montoya to focus on. Clara spent the first week in Santiago's mansion trying to be exactly what she said she was, a housekeeper. Nothing more. It was harder than it should have been. Not because of the work. She had done harder work for less pay. It was harder because the house told a story she kept reading without meaning to. A child's drawing, framed in gold on the wall outside Santiago's office. A stick figure man and a shorter stick figure woman, and the word mama written in careful 8-year-old letters. A shelf in the library with a medical textbook and a worn paperback of Pablo Neruda, and a photograph of a man she recognized from news articles as Rodrigo Reyes, dead 6 years, standing in the rain outside what appeared to be a boxing gym with his arm around a teenage boy who had the same jaw and the same dark eyes, and was smiling in a way his adult face seemed to have forgotten how. She read the house the way she had always read patients, looking for the things they weren't saying, the pain that lived between the surfaces. She was reading the library photograph when a voice behind her said, "That was taken 3 weeks before he died." She turned. Santiago was standing in the doorway in a way that suggested he'd been there longer than she thought. He was not wearing a suit today. Dark shirt, sleeves rolled up, the neck tattoo was fully visible. He looked less like a boardroom and more like the boy in the photograph.
"I'm sorry," she said immediately. "I was supposed to be dusting. I know what you were doing." He crossed the room and stood beside her, looking at the photograph. "He used to say the gym smelled like truth, said you couldn't lie to yourself after 3 rounds on the bag." He paused. "I've never found anything else that worked as well." Clara looked at him sideways. He was looking at the photograph with an expression she recognized from patients who had recently lost someone, not the fresh grief, but the settled kind, the kind that had found its place and stayed. "Did you take it up, the boxing?" "Every morning, 6 a.m. He looked at her then. The reading the room look that she was beginning to understand was simply how he looked at everything. "You knew what that photograph was the moment you saw it, didn't you? You're good at reading people." "I was a nurse," she said, before she could stop herself. Something shifted in his face. "Was. My license is under review." She kept her voice level. "It'll be reinstated. There was a billing error at the clinic I worked at. I didn't make the error, but I was the senior staff member, so—" She stopped herself. "I'm sorry, that's not relevant." "No," he said quietly. "It's very relevant." He left without explaining what he meant by that, and Clara stood in the library with her dustcloth and the photograph, and the strange warm ache of having been seen clearly by a person she hadn't been expecting. Isabella Montoya arrived on a Friday evening in a car that cost more than most people's houses, wearing a dress that had clearly been chosen to be the most expensive thing in any room she entered. She was beautiful. Clara could see that objectively, the way she could see that the marble tiles were beautiful, aesthetically obvious, emotionally neutral. She walked into the Reyes mansion like she already owned it, and she smiled at Santiago with the particular practiced warmth of someone who had rehearsed the expression. She did not look at Clara at all, not a glance, not a nod. Clara carried her bags from the car to the guest suite, and was thanked by the driver, not by Isabella. Clara told herself this didn't matter. She had been invisible before. Invisible was the goal. But then she was setting out breakfast the next morning, and Isabella came down alone early, and for a moment she didn't know she was being watched, and Clara saw a face that was entirely different from the Friday evening face, calculating, scanning the room, taking inventory. She picked up a small silver frame from the side table, turned it over, set it back. She opened a drawer in the console table, glanced inside, closed it. She did this with the efficiency of someone conducting a very specific kind of search. Clara set down the coffee pot she was holding and said, "Good morning." Isabella startled, then recovered so fast it might have been imagined. "Oh, the maid. You're quiet. Sorry to startle you. Breakfast is ready when you are." Isabella looked at her for the first time, actually looked, that inventory kind of look, and smiled the rehearsed smile. "What's your name?" "Clara." "Clara." Isabella tilted her head. "You're very pretty for a maid. Has Santiago noticed?" Clara kept her expression entirely neutral. "I'll let you know when the coffee is fresh." She walked back to the kitchen and stood very still for a moment, feeling something cold settle in her stomach that had nothing to do with the early hour. She didn't know that the woman in the blue house uniform polishing silverware at the far end of the kitchen had heard every word and was making very careful notes in the small leather notebook she kept in her apron pocket. By the second week, Clara had developed a theory about Valentina that she kept very carefully to herself. The woman polished silver and mopped floors and smiled warmly when spoken to, but she held herself wrong. It was subtle, the kind of subtle that a nurse learned to read, the particular way a person's body betrayed its real relationship to a space. Most people who cleaned houses held themselves slightly diminished, heads angled down, shoulders slightly in. It was not subservience so much as the accumulated posture of spending years in rooms that belonged to other people. Valentina stood straight, not arrogantly, just naturally, the straightness of a woman entirely comfortable in her skin. She moved through the mansion with a specific quality of ownership that Clara could not quite explain away. She knew where everything was kept without being told. She rearranged the kitchen pantry once while humming without asking anyone, and the new arrangement was obviously superior.
And she watched Isabella with the particular quality of attention a doctor gave a patient whose symptoms didn't yet add up to a diagnosis she had a name for. Clara watched Valentina watching Isabella and said nothing, because it was not her house and not her family, and she was supposed to be invisible. But on a Tuesday morning, Isabella asked Clara to press her dress for the evening, and when Clara brought it back 20 minutes later, immaculate, Isabella looked at it and said, "This crease is wrong. Do it again." The crease was not wrong. Clara had been pressing clothes since she was 12. "Of course," Clara said, and turned to go. "And Clara," Isabella's voice dropped into something almost pleasant, which was Clara had learned when it was most dangerous. "I've noticed you talking to Santiago on more than one occasion. I want to be clear that your relationship with my fiancé is professional, strictly. Are we understanding each other?" Clara turned back around. She held Isabella's gaze with the steady brown eyes that had looked at patients in pain and patients who were dying and patients who were cruel because they were frightened, and she said, "Absolutely, Miss Montoya," in the same tone she used for all of them. She walked down the hallway and found Valentina outside the linen closet, pretending to count towels with the focus of someone who had been standing there for approximately 45 seconds. Their eyes met. Something passed between them that neither acknowledged. Clara kept walking. The fight happened on a Wednesday night, and Clara heard it from the kitchen because voices in that house carried further than anyone seemed to realize.
"She's a maid, Isabella. She looks at you like you're something worth looking at, Santiago. Don't tell me you haven't noticed. What I've noticed is that you've been in this house for 10 days and you've been rude to every member of my staff." "Your staff. God, you talk about them like they're people you actually... They are people." A silence. Heavy. The kind that followed a word that revealed something. "I need you to understand something." Santiago's voice had gone somewhere very quiet, which was Clara had learned in 2 weeks was when it was most serious. "I grew up watching my father speak to people who worked for him like they were furniture. I spent a long time deciding I would never do that. Anyone who works in my house is treated with basic human dignity. That is non-negotiable. You're defending a maid over your fiancé. I'm defending a principle I've held my whole adult life. The fact that it applies to someone who works in my house doesn't make it smaller. Another silence. Then heels on marble, quick and angry, retreating upstairs. Clara stood very still in the kitchen and did not look at the woman in the blue uniform who was clearly at this point not actually concerned with folding dish towels. He's been like that his whole life, Valentina said very quietly, to no one in particular. His father used to say he had too much heart to be dangerous. She paused. His father was wrong. Clara looked at her. Valentina was looking at the doorway. You love him very much, Clara said softly. Valentina's hands stilled on the towel she was folding. She looked at Clara with the direct, measuring gaze of someone deciding how much truth to give. Yes, she said, simply. I do. And Clara, who had been turning over her theory for 2 weeks, felt it click into place with the quiet certainty of a diagnosis confirmed. She did not say it out loud, but they looked at each other in the kitchen for a long, clear moment, and something between them shifted into a different register. Not employer and employee, not two women pretending at roles that didn't fit. Something more honest than either of them had planned. The moment that broke everything open came the following Friday, and it came from a direction none of them expected. Clara was walking past the dining room with fresh linens when she heard Isabella on the phone. The door was ajar. Clara should have kept walking. She stopped when she heard the name. The Santiago situation is taking longer than we planned, Isabella was saying, voice low and clipped in the way Clara had come to recognize as her real voice. Not the rehearsed warmth, not the cool hostility she aimed at staff, but the businesslike efficiency she used when she thought she was unobserved. My father needs the merger finalized before the end of the quarter. The prenuptial agreement is the problem. His lawyers built it specifically to prevent what we need to... A pause. I know. I'm working on it. Clara stood in the hallway with the linens pressed to her chest and felt something go very cold in the center of her.
She walked to the kitchen. Valentina was already there, and the expression on her face said she had heard it too, from wherever she had been, in whatever room, with those specific ears that heard everything in this house. How long have you known? Clara asked quietly. Valentina set down her coffee cup. Something in her face had gone terribly still. I suspected the family connection from the beginning. Her father and Santiago's business associate have been in conflict for 2 years. I didn't know the scope of it until... She stopped. I need to think. You need to tell him. I know. Valentina. Clara kept her voice gentle, the way she had kept it gentle for patients receiving hard news, because this was hard news, and this woman, whoever she was receiving it about someone she loved. He needs to hear it from you, not from a phone call you can't undo, not from a document she signs before someone intercepts it, from you. Valentina looked at her for a long moment. Her eyes, Clara noticed, for the first time, were the same dark shade as Santiago's. There's something I haven't told you, Valentina said. I know, Clara said. I've known for about a week.
A silence. Then Valentina Reyes, matriarch of the Reyes family, widow of Rodrigo Reyes, woman who had built an empire beside a man who smelled like truth at 6 a.m, laughed. It was a real laugh, surprised and a little rueful, and it made her look, for a moment, exactly like the boy in the photograph. How? She asked. You hold yourself like someone who owns the place, Clara said, because you do. Another silence, longer this time. I need to tell my son, Valentina said, both things in that order. I'll make coffee, Clara said, and meant it as the offering it was. She did not expect to be in the room when it happened. She was in the kitchen when she heard Santiago's voice say her name, not called for, just said, the particular way you say a name when you've been thinking about it and it comes out by accident or by choice in a sentence not meant for you to hear. She stilled beside the counter. His voice was low from the hallway, talking to someone, and she heard, "Clara's nursing license was suspended over a billing error she didn't make. Did you know that?" And then a pause, and then, "I had it looked into. My attorney says the investigation is being deliberately stalled by the clinic's administrators who needed a scapegoat. She should have had it back 3 months ago." She stood very still, holding a dishcloth, feeling something enormous move through her. He had looked into it. He had looked into it, and he hadn't told her, because he was the kind of man who did things and didn't announce them, she was learning, who fixed things quietly and stepped back from the credit.
She pressed her back against the counter and tilted her head up and did not make a sound, and the feelings she had been carefully keeping in their boxes for 2 weeks did something inconvenient and structural, like a shelf giving way under weight it had been holding too long. When she came back to herself, Valentina was standing in the kitchen doorway looking at her with an expression she recognized from patients who were watching someone else receive a diagnosis they had already survived themselves. "He's a good man," Valentina said simply. "I know," Clara said. Her voice was steadier than she expected. "This is going to be complicated. I know that too. He doesn't—" Valentina paused. "After Elena, 4 years ago, he doesn't let things become real easily. He needs time. He needs someone with patience." Clara looked at her. "Are you giving me your blessing?" she asked, half surprised by her own directness, half not surprised at all, because this woman brought out a kind of directness in her. Valentina tilted her head, a ghost of a smile. "I'm telling you what I know about my son. What you do with that information is your own business." She walked away, and Clara stood in the kitchen and thought about patience, and about boxes, and about the particular way a shelf felt when it gave way. The confrontation with Isabella happened the next afternoon. Clara did not plan it. She planned to say nothing, to stay invisible, to let Valentina and Santiago handle the information she had given them. She planned to press the dress and pour the coffee and keep her expression neutral. But she came around a corner and found Isabella standing in front of a maid, a young woman named Rosa, who had been working in the house for 3 years and who had done nothing except stand in the hallway and saying, in the coldest voice Clara had heard her yet, "You're in my way, move." Rosa moved. She moved with her head down and her shoulders in, and the accumulated posture of someone who had spent too long in rooms that belonged to other people. Clara stopped, walking. "Ms. Montoya," she said. Isabella turned with the expression of someone who had been interrupted mid-thought. "What?" "Rosa has worked in this house for 3 years." Clara kept her voice level. She kept it the way she kept it for patients who needed calm more than they needed volume. Isabella's eyes went to her with the same inventory look, but sharper now, because Clara had just done something her category of person was not supposed to do. "Excuse me?" "I'll excuse this once," Clara said, which was the most audacious thing she had said out loud in approximately 3 years, and she felt the truth of it settle in her chest like a stone in still water. The silence was enormous. Rosa had gone completely still against the wall. Isabella looked at Clara with an expression that passed through several things very quickly: surprise, fury, calculation, and landed on something that was probably going to be very bad for Clara professionally. "You're fired," Isabella said. "You don't employ me, Santiago does." "Santiago will do what I—" "No," said a voice from behind her. "He won't." Santiago was standing at the end of the hallway. He had come from the direction of his office. He had, Clara would later calculate, been walking down that hallway before any of this started, and it stopped, and she did not know how much he had heard. But from the expression on his face, she had a reasonable estimate. He looked at Isabella with the particular quality of stillness that preceded, Clara had observed, every one of his most definitive decisions. "We need to talk," he said. Not to Clara. Clara was packing her bag in the room she had been given when the knock came. She had been expecting it,
After what had just happened in the hallway, after the conversation she had overheard, after everything that was clearly coming apart in this house, she was clearly not going to be employed here much longer, and she was trying to make peace with that, and with the 3 weeks' pay that wouldn't cover her rent, and with the investigation that was apparently being stalled deliberately by people who considered her disposable. The knock was not Santiago's. She knew that before she opened the door, because Santiago's knock, she had learned, was 2 even raps, controlled, deliberate. This was a single, softer knock, and when she opened the door, Valentina was standing there in the blue uniform she was still wearing, though it no longer looked like anything except a costume on a woman who had finally stopped pretending. "He's ending the engagement," said Valentina. Clara sat down on the edge of the bed. She was working with her father to gain access to documentation in the Reyes archives, business records from Rodrigo's era. "There's a dispute between the Montoya family and one of our former partners. Our lawyers have been handling it for 2 years, and Isabella was here to find the documentation that would end it in her family's favor." Valentina sat in the chair by the window, very straight, the natural straightness of a woman entirely comfortable in her skin. He's known something was wrong for weeks. He suspected the business-family connection. What he didn't know was the scope. "Did you tell him everything?" Clara asked.
About the phone call, yes. About the other thing, about me, about why I came, he knows. He knew before I finished the first sentence. He said he suspected after the first week. Something like a smile. He has too much of his father in him. Rodrigo could never be fooled by someone who loved him. Clara looked at her hands in her lap. "And me? He knows you figured it out. And?" Valentina looked at her steadily. "And I believe he'd like to speak with you. But he understands if you'd prefer to leave immediately, given the circumstances. He said to tell you that his attorney is filing an emergency motion on your license tomorrow morning, with or without any other decisions you make. It's not conditional on anything." Something warm cracked through the center of Clara's chest like sunlight through a curtain. "Not conditional?" she repeated. He didn't phrase it as a gift. He phrased it as a correctable injustice that should have been corrected months ago. Valentina's voice was very quiet. "That's the most him sentence I've heard in 4 years." Clara pressed both hands flat on her thighs and sat with that for a moment. The image of a man she had known for 2 weeks, who had heard her whole history in one hallway conversation, who had taken it to his attorney without telling her, without asking for anything back, without making it a transaction. She thought about patients, about the ones who couldn't be saved, about the ones who could, about the difference between people who saw other people as furniture and people who didn't, and about which kind of world she wanted to live in, and about shelves giving way under weight. "I don't want to leave," she said, finally. Not to Valentina, exactly, just out loud, to herself, to the room, to whatever version of herself had been making decisions since she was 12 years old with a mop and a future she built herself 1 floor at a time. Valentina stood. She crossed the room and stood in front of Clara and did something unexpected. She took both of Clara's hands in hers and looked at her with the direct, unblinking honesty of a woman who had survived 50 years and was not sentimental about the truth.
"I have never in my life approved of anyone quickly," she said. "I am not a fast approval type of woman. Ask Santiago. He'll tell you I made his father wait 8 months before I introduced him to my parents." She paused. "But I want you to understand that I came here to test a woman I believed was wrong for my son. And what I found, instead, was a woman who defended my staff and called me on my deception, and looked at my son like he was a person who deserved to be seen. And somehow, despite absolutely no plan to do so, I seem to have completely approved of her." Clara felt her eyes go wet, which she was not expecting, and she blinked hard against it, which didn't really work. And Valentina, who was clearly not a sentimental woman, squeezed her hands once and released them. "He's in the library," Valentina said. "The photograph is on the left shelf." She walked out and left Clara sitting on the edge of the bed with wet eyes and a decision already made. Because some decisions, she had learned, you've been making your whole life before you know it. She found him in the library.
He was standing with his back to the door, looking at the photograph. The one of his father in the rain outside the boxing gym, arm around the teenage boy with the same jaw and the dark eyes and the forgotten smile. She stood in the doorway for a moment, not announcing herself, because he needed whatever he was taking from the photograph, and she wasn't going to interrupt it. He spoke without turning around. "How long have you known about my mother?" "A week," she said. "Maybe a little more." "And you didn't say anything." "It wasn't my family." He was quiet for a moment. "She does this. She always does this. Since I was a child. She tests people. She has to know who a person is when they think nobody important is watching." A pause. "My father used to say she'd missed her calling as an intelligence officer." "She loves you very much," Clara said. He turned then. He had been in whatever version of the day this had been. The engagement, the confrontation, the conversations. And it showed, not in his expression, which was still that reading the room expression, but in his shoulders, which were carrying something. "She approved of you," he said, "in case that wasn't clear from whatever she said to you. She said she approved of me. Then she's been more direct with you than she's been with most people I've dated since I was 19. He looked at her the same way he had in the hallway on her first day. Careful. Thorough. But it was different now. It wasn't reading a new variable. It was reading something he had been reading for 2 weeks, and finally, carefully, deciding what it meant. "I looked into your license. I know. I heard you. I should have told you. Why didn't you?" He paused. The honesty in the pause was the most open she had seen him. "Because I didn't know how to do it without it becoming something, and I wasn't sure yet what I wanted the something to be." Clara crossed the room. She stood in front of him the way she had stood in front of Isabella in the hallway, not with performance, not with armor, just with exactly herself, the woman who had scrubbed floors since she was 12, and lost her mother, and lost her license, and was still standing, because the other option had never once seemed acceptable. "You're a complicated person to know," she said. "I've been told."
"You're also," she stopped, choosing the word carefully, "decent, in the original sense of it, the kind of decent that's structural, the kind you can't perform." Something moved in his face, the ghost of a smile, the same one from the photograph, the one he had apparently forgotten somewhere between 19 and 32. "My father used to say I had too much heart to be dangerous," he said. "My mother told me tonight that she thinks he was wrong about that." "He was wrong about both," Clara said. "The heart doesn't cancel the danger. It's part of what makes it." He looked at her for a long moment. The library was quiet. The photograph was on the shelf. The city outside the window was doing what cities do at night, indifferent and lit up, carrying on. "Stay," he said. It came out low, rough, certain, the same voice he used in the hallway on her first day, the voice that did not shake even when everything around it had gone wrong. Clara looked at him. She thought about all the floors she had scrubbed, and all the patients she had cared for, and all the versions of invisible she had been in all the rooms that belonged to other people, and about what it felt like on the one afternoon in 2 weeks when she had stopped being invisible and said something out loud, and how the ceiling had not fallen in. "I'll stay," she said, "but I have conditions." He raised an eyebrow. The ghost of the smile came fully through this time, and it was exactly like the photograph, warm and a little surprised, and it changed his whole face. "Let's hear them. First condition, I'm not a maid, I'm a nurse. I'll have my license back within a month. Your attorney is apparently handling it. When it's reinstated, I need to go back to work. I'm not someone's houseguest." "Agreed." "Second condition, your mother stays, in whatever capacity she wants. She's remarkable, and this house is better with her in it." He looked startled by that one. Then something in his expression went soft in a way she suspected very few people had seen. "I'll pass that along." "Third condition," she held his gaze. "This has to be slow. I don't do things I haven't thought about, and neither do you. And anything worth doing is worth doing slowly enough to do right." He was quiet for a moment, the reading the room look, but turned inward this time, like he was reading himself and finding something he recognized. "Those are very reasonable conditions," he said. "I'm a reasonable person. I'm beginning to understand that." He said it simply, without performance, which was, she had learned, how he said things that mattered. They stood in the library, in the quiet, with the photograph on the shelf and the city outside the window, and it was not dramatic or cinematic or the way endings usually went in stories. It was just two people standing in a room, both of them complicated, both of them with histories that had put them on their knees more than once, deciding together, without announcement, to try. 3 months later, Clara Reyes Marsh, the hyphen was new, a small grammatical bridge between who she had been and who she was becoming, stood in the corridor of Miami General Hospital in her nursing scrubs, with her reinstated license badge clipped to her breast pocket, and felt something she had no clean word for except right.
The investigation had closed 2 weeks after Santiago's attorney filed the emergency motion. The clinic administrators had been cited for misconduct. Clara had received a written apology that she read once, folded carefully, and put in a drawer beside the worn Bible and the grocery bag of photographs. She was an hour into her first shift back when she looked up from a patient's chart and found Santiago standing at the end of the corridor in the particular stillness of a man who did not announce himself in spaces that weren't his. He had brought coffee, 2 cups, in a carrier, from the place 3 blocks from the hospital that she had mentioned once in passing, without thinking he was listening.
He handed her one and did not make a speech about it. "You didn't have to come," she said. "I know. You could have left the coffee at the desk." "I could have." He looked at her in the scrubs with the badge and the chart, and the ghost smile was there again. The one she had been cataloging for 3 months now, the one that appeared at specific moments and then retreated back to wherever he kept it. "You look like yourself." Clara looked down at herself, rumpled, practical, entirely functional, and then back up at him. "I always look like myself." "I know." He said it in the way he said the things that mattered, without performance, without looking away. That's the point. She took the coffee. Their hands were close on the carrier for a moment, and she thought about what Valentina had said, that patience was the thing, that he needed time, that this was a man who didn't let things become real easily. She thought about slow. She thought about doing things right. She thought about the hallway on her first day, a mop bucket between them, 2 people reading each other across a small piece of practical plastic, and how much and how little had changed since then. "Your mother called me this morning," she said. Something in his expression shifted. Fond, exasperated, exactly right. What did she want? "She says she's teaching me to make Rodrigo's rice dish. She started last Thursday." He stared at her. "She's never taught anyone that recipe. She said she'd take it to her grave." She said, Clara paused, choosing the words carefully, because they were Valentina's and deserved to be handled with care. She said she'd decided that some things were meant to be passed forward instead of kept, and she'd been holding on to it long enough. The expression on Santiago's face was not a small thing. It was not the ghost smile. It was something larger and less controlled, something she had not seen yet. Grief and love and gratitude moving through him all at once, the way they do in people who feel things structurally all the way through. He looked at the corridor ceiling for a moment. A single breath. "Rodrigo made it every Sunday morning," he said, finally, voice rougher than usual. "Without fail. The whole house smelled like it." He looked at her. "I haven't had it since the year he died." Clara stood with her coffee in a hospital corridor and did not say anything, because sometimes the most caring thing a person could do was simply be present in the space where someone else was feeling something real. After a moment he looked at her, the reading the room look, but all the calculation gone, just seeing. "Stay for dinner on Sunday," he said. "Both of us need to be there if she's going to cook." "I'll need to check my shift schedule," Clara said. "I know." He wasn't impatient. That was the thing about him, she was learning. He was a patient man in the ways that mattered, the structural ways, the ways you could trust. He turned to leave. At the end of the corridor he paused without turning back, the way he did sometimes, a habit she was accumulating like small photographs, these particular moments of him. "For what it's worth," he said, "my mother hasn't approved of anyone in 50 years. She approved of you in 2 weeks. She was undercover in your house," Clara pointed out.
She said that made it more reliable, not less. She's not wrong. He walked away, and Clara stood in the hospital corridor with her coffee and her reinstated badge, and the sound of a Sunday dinner already forming itself in her mind, the smell of rice and a family knitting itself back together, and a woman who had arrived with a mop bucket and left with something she hadn't gone looking for and probably would have been terrified to name if it had been offered to her at the beginning. The best things, she was learning, were like that. You found them on your knees, and then you got back up. On a Sunday morning 8 months later, Clara stood at the stove in the Reyes kitchen with Valentina at her elbow, learning the exact angle at which the rice needed to be stirred, and the specific moment at which you added the second layer of seasoning, and the way you knew it was right by smell before you knew it by sight. Santiago was at the table with his coffee and the newspaper, wearing a dark shirt with the sleeves rolled up, and the neck tattoo fully visible, and the settled ease of a man who was in his house on a Sunday morning and knew exactly where he wanted to be. Mia, his cousin's daughter, who spent every third weekend at the mansion, was on the floor drawing with colored pencils, with the absolute focused joy of a child who has found the thing that makes the world make sense. It was ordinary. It was Sunday morning shaped. It smelled like Rodrigo Reyes's rice and coffee and the particular domestic quiet of a house that was full again. Valentina nudged Clara's elbow gently. "You're letting it cook too long on this side. Turn it." I turned it. "Not enough. Here."
She covered Clara's hand with her own on the wooden spoon and adjusted the motion, and the smell deepened and changed into something Clara's body recognized as home, even though she had never smelled it before. There. Now you know. Santiago looked up from his newspaper. He looked at his mother and Clara standing at the stove with their hands on the spoon together, and then the expression on his face was the one Clara had been cataloging for months. Not the ghost smile, not the reading the room look, but the one underneath all of it, the one she had understood since the night in the library was the truest thing on his face. He looked at her the way the boy in the photograph looked at the camera, like someone who had not yet learned to keep it back. Clara caught his eye over Valentina's shoulder. Something passed between them, easy, wordless, the particular shorthand of people who have spent enough time in each other's silences to have built a language out of them. She turned back to the stove. Valentina was watching her with the same steady, measuring look she'd had from the beginning, from the morning she handed a stranger a blue uniform and showed her the supply closet and set something in motion she hadn't entirely planned. You know, Valentina said quietly, just to Clara, low enough that it was only theirs. When I came up with this plan, I expected to find someone wrong for him. I expected to do my duty as a mother, send her on her way, and go home. And instead, Clara asked. Valentina looked at her, the direct, unblinking honesty. The woman who had outlasted empires and grief and 50 years of this life, who had built the spine of something that would outlast her, who had put on a blue uniform and gotten on her knees and tested someone she never expected to love. And instead, she said simply, I found you.
Clara kept her eyes on the rice, because if she looked at Valentina right now, something structural was going to happen in her face that she wasn't ready for in a kitchen on a Sunday morning. She stirred the rice at the angle she had been taught, added the seasoning at the moment the smell told her to, and felt the warmth of the stove and the weight of the house around her, and the sound of a child drawing on the floor, and the rustle of a newspaper, and the coffee going cold because someone had stopped drinking it to watch. I think it's ready, she said when she trusted her voice. Valentina leaned in and smelled it, nodded. The particular nod of a woman who has been right about things for 50 years and knows it without needing to say so. Yes, she said, it is. And they served it at the table in the Sunday morning light, and Rodrigo Reyes's rice was passed forward for the first time in 6 years, carried in new hands through a kitchen that smelled like home, and the family that sat around the table was the kind of family that was chosen as much as it was born into, imperfect and complicated and full of people who had been on their knees at one point or another and had gotten back up every time. Outside, Miami did what it always did, bright and relentless and entirely indifferent to the small, extraordinary things happening in the rooms of people who were learning, slowly and with great patience, to stay.